Andrew, you and Tommy Chen.
Yeah, long time no see. A couple of years ago. Oh, way back, yeah.
How's things?
Yeah, they're bearing up. Yeah, no, we're doing a huge extension. Signed for 3 bed service and access. Which is designed project management.
All right.
But it's interesting, you know, you always do it, can't you? And,
Never stop, do you? Never stop.
yeah.
You got a clicker, have you?
Yeah.
Is it working, is it?
I don't know.
It's really good. They've not installed it.
Let's have a look. No, it's not working.
I don't think they've installed it.
No.
Well, they have, because it's there.
I can use.
No, I bought a proper. Look, I bought a real one. I'll put my one in a second. Just hold. Give me a second. It should work. Definitely not working. Let's check that.
No, you move one, because that's the next.
Is it?
Slide is the one with the speech mark on.
Oh, it's right. Yeah, it's working. Oh, it's not doing that.
It's not working very efficiently.
Is this back forward?
Don't give it, you go forward, go backwards.
You go back.
Give it my best.
No, that should be going back. Right, that's going back. Oh, it's not working then, 'cause that's supposed to be going back.
I'll tell you what, I'll just use
Well,
this. Don't worry, I'll just use this.
Sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got this one, definitely works. It's up to you.
Oh, alright.
Let's try
Let's
this.
have a go, see if I can do it.
Well, what's that? Let's just...
That's your trusted one, is it?
Yeah, this is mine.
Must be your best customers.
This is one of the best customers. Oh, God. Now what's it say? So what drives me insane. That's kit. No, that's it works now.
Oh, is it?
Just done your best.
Alright.
Now try it. Try.
Point it at the...
No, don't need to. You can have it in your pocket. It doesn't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, keep it in your pocket. It doesn't matter. I should keep quite a bit surprised with it.
That's part of the trick.
That's my part of the trick. No, you don't need to. You put it in your jacket pocket. It doesn't point at anything.
Yeah.
You're thinking people going, what's crazy people? What's about it?
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
It's down there. No, that does it. It's infrared, so you do it in your pocket.
Yeah.
It does work, but it's just a thin time.
So, are you busy?
That works uni. But if you've got private ones, bonkers, just crazy, but nothing like that. It's not bonkers, I'll just shoot myself. My whole so it's just tough, but I see some uni.
It's hard to get builders, isn't it?
Mm.
And how much would you say the day rate was for skills?
So I just had an extension for my house, kitchen and bedroom. I did it for 30, so it's still not there. The labour, 100 right? Steel man for 225 on the yeah, and then the bloody contract had a 20% profit on top because he's got downtime, guys, you know. And I did realise I should have told. I budgeted 30 and then 52. to her, with a bit decorated.
Well, yeah, I'm really sure that that is, even when you kind of know what you're doing, it's still makes sense.
No, always up. Now I'm going crazy with prices. My price goes up, but cool it sometimes. Way over the top. If it's decoration, that's the hardest thing you know that keeps the price up. Because you get Russian brands or doing it for days. But kosher job, decorators 200 a day. Trades were 225. Inclusive. With me, no loan.
So I mean that's why I use the main contractor for the first part of the website and phase two of the first has some bank. But see, talking about individual trades, they're loyalty.
Not to you. But for the guy I work with, he's white, he's not working much. And he's built an extension for under 20,000. It's amazing job. Well, I thought it was like 10 by 20, but 20 foot on 10 foot. But what the shed he did, this I've got the design done by like a building. And she spent hours on the phone getting contractors to do it big. Because she's got the time, she built the time herself up on the line.
Wow.
She's got bricky, she's got big.
That's interesting.
Oh, no. Well, she's frightening, she's terrified, she's really mega organised.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, the biggest part of these TV programs, people don't have project managers.
Oh, yeah.
Well, teaching is a big skill set. Skills arrangements, things like that. And, you know, it's like, if you don't specify that skill,
No, she was brilliant. I know her. She's a tremendous organiser. She's scary with a contractor. Right in space, you know. But my mate's a bit laid back. But I know I've got a conservatory over in the kitchen, spiral down. It's at 42. It's a really nice kitchen, great kitchen. Looks the butts nuts. I've still got enough money not made to not put the carpet floor in. I still want to redecorate it first. Contractor was really good. Turned out when he said it, all the guys were spot on. And I saved me a lot of money to spiral down by having what's a square box made called? I rented for or something. It's a rectangular RSJ box.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Rather than have a
Yeah, we always use them. Well, they use the initials anyway.
yeah, the
Victorian
Victorian.
Houses.
Well, the original structure in there, the main that's got the RSJ. I think the whole lot behind the technology running is not
Yeah, it's funny you should say that because the builders
Yeah.
I mean, we've got these double ones in that were about 4.5 high.
Yeah.
Two together. And they use the chains to get them up there. And they go, we put all factories.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's true.
Yeah, my mate's a structural engineer. But an RSJ like that, huge red on 2 30-inch piers. I said, of course, so you need to get a full there. Oh, you don't need trouble.
Yeah, they're original. But you know what? It's becoming so common now to put steel that which we did actually. We had a little bit. But I turned up and the guys were manhandling weapons going. I said, live Genesis. I just, you know, I don't know what to do. I just stopped it. I said, sure, because the contractor, you know, they price that in their specification for price on that. So it was
Ends up with broken on the bone.
well, you know,
Close the site.
it was like, yeah, that's the only.
Let's get it going.
Oh, do I need a mic on the?
You do. Where's the mic? Yeah.
I mean, I can use this if you like.
No. Because
Because this can be a bit filmy.
no. The usual thing, I'll go out there, stop them coming in the front, I'll go to the back to check the mic,
Yeah.
and I'll come and sit beside there. Okay?
Yeah, check it's not too boomy because that.
No, I'll check it, I'll just stop them coming in, and I'll go to the back. Let's do it on your shirt.
Do you think so, or just put it on the?
No, he won't. That's it.
Yeah.
That's about right. Let's see what it's like.
If I've got a cough, I'll switch to this one.
Yeah, you're okay, don't worry. Don't
Yeah.
worry. Sit in your pocket.
I'm having throat sweets.
You're okay, right?
Yeah.
Let's get it going.
All right.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CPD. My name is Andrew and I'm chair this evening. It's the last one before Christmas in the evening, so I wish you Merry Christmas. Tonight's topic is common defects in Victorian houses, and our speaker is Ian Roth. Ian is author of 8 popular Haynes property manuals, and is a regular contributor to magazines such as Period Living and Home Building and Renovating. Ian began renovating Victorian houses in the late 1980s, before qualified as a chartered surveyor in 1993. Today, Ian is the director of the Zenner Consultants and manages the surveying website rightsurvey.co.uk. Please welcome our speaker.
Well, thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks for coming along, everybody, braving the hordes of Christmas party goers this time of year. The Victorian house is a national icon. It defines our townscapes. In some areas, entire suburbs date from that era, and surveyors are going to find that the majority of their surveys are on Victorian houses. And I think perhaps for the less experienced they can be a bit of a minefield, and I do apologise for the language being used in this by our house surveyor here, but it can be justified sometimes. We, 10 years ago, we had the bright idea of doing a Haynes manual, which kind of tried to summarise the defects that you find typically in this classic house type, the Victorian terrace in particular. And last year we produced an even better version, I like to think, which kind of extended it to cover a bit more on conservation and a lot more on insulation and extending for 21st century living. So the idea behind this was to try and logically define defects, what the causes behind the defects, and solutions. Of course, 1 in 6 UK homes dates from this era, so they're pretty important. So what I want to do, I think this is quite a useful way of defining different groups of defects that you come across. You might have other categories you could put them into, but let's have a look. Well, lack of maintenance is a very common problem. We're going to look in detail in a minute at types of defect. The effects of ageing. Nothing lasts forever. Good old property botches, misguided alterations that homeowners get up to. Shocking examples to follow shortly. Our lifestyles are not what the Victorians were, and the environment, they tell me, is changing. But I think most interesting is actually the inherent defects which date from the time of construction, because it's a funny thing this, but the materials the Victorians used were generally a lot better, certainly timber, slate, tiles, much better than the average house builder today. The workmanship very often was better, but then of course they were good at botching as well, and we'll look at some of those shortcuts that caused problems all these years later. Now you're probably wondering why there's a picture of the social maverick and political commentator known as Will Self, who's looking pretty crestfallen. The word fallen is relevant here because, as you can see, there's a pile of masonry behind him. Now, why is that? Well, a few years ago in Stockwell, South London, the entire parapet wall of a terrace collapsed, fell off. Only by the grace of God was nobody killed or injured. The insurers refused to pay, citing lack of maintenance. Now that's interesting, lack of maintenance, because when we go back to that list, you might say mortgage lenders have the same kind of mono-track mentality as insurers. Tick a box, lack of maintenance. A lot of defects is more than one cause. Now, thinking of that collapse, how many of those do you think might also apply? Sure, lack of maintenance is quite possibly one, but yeah, perhaps it was built, they weren't properly bonded in to the party walls when they were built. Well, ageing certainly has an effect. And I guess it depends on the direction of the wind as well. If you've got a great big wall that's being pushed by the southwesterly wind. So anyway, it's only because Deborah Orr, his wife, who writes for The Guardian, and Will Self, they're celebrities, and they eventually got the insurers to pay up. But it's interesting how they define the cause of a defect. That, of course, this isn't the same property, but you can see what's known as the butterfly roof or the London roof. You know, out of sight is out of mind. So you've got these great big lead-lined valleys full of tennis balls and old Barbie dolls and goodness knows what, blocking the gutters. They probably weren't built, very often they weren't, the step in the lead work wasn't 150 mil, wasn't quite sufficient, the lead was too long. On the other hand, it was quite thick, so they may not have been great when they were built sometimes. Right, let's have a look at, first category was neglected maintenance. Well, you see that all, I think as a surveyor, you go around, you can't help but bore your family with stories of dodgy maintenance or lack of. Oh, that's good, isn't it? That's the 2 seasons. Well, it's really nature reclaiming buildings, which of course leads to damp ingress in particular. Category number 2, well, nothing lasts forever, and certainly the nails they used for slating may have been galvanised iron, something like that, galvanised steel, and they rust, so hence you get the odd clip, like tingles, sometimes used to secure a few slates. But I mean, compounded by people walking. You can't walk on slate roofs unless you're very, because they're like eggshells. You can walk on tiles, you walk on slates, crack. So people installing aerials and satellite dishes and solar panels, it's a common cause of cracking, but it's not always as knackered as that. You know, you can get hidden hairline cracks that only manifest themselves quite a bit later. A while ago, a firm I did some surveying for, they had a claim. There was a pram in a living room and the ceiling collapsed. The baby wasn't in the pram, but you can imagine the homeowners were not happy. And this kind of was quite a scary claim because the surveyor had described the ceilings as plasterboard, and of course they weren't. So it was decided by the surveying firm to put a clause in, put a phrase in home buyer surveys saying that lath and plaster ceilings are prone to sudden and immediate collapse. Well, you know, what does somebody, it gets a green, you know, that's okay. What do people think when they read that? I veer more towards the conservation point of view, which is you conserve them and you fix them, whereas builders tend to say, oh, take it down. I think that clearly vibration and so on can damage, and damp leaks can cause looseness of patches of lath and plaster, but I don't think you need to condemn entire ceilings without good reason. But this is the point. You've got defects that are more than one cause. This is a good old Victorian favourite, the single-storey bay, and there's a very small downpipe, about a centimetre bore, something like that, if you're lucky. Of course, that got blocked up about 50 years ago, and in the meantime, the damp's been soaking through the wall, and the big timber lintel, the Bressumer, as it's known, can rot. So there's maybe not much of a fall on the slope, on the flat roof. Combination of causes with roof leaks as well. Now, this is interesting. Shocking, isn't it? I mean, you know, that's equivalent to sitting on a branch and sawing it off. You know, semi-suicidal. It's madness to run waste pipes anyway through joists. So the rule is an eighth. Cut an eighth off the top max. Although I think 15mm pipes tend to be drilled through the centre now, a bit like electric cables. Then there's inappropriate works. That was a claim against the surveyor who missed it, actually, but obviously a botch. You know. We'll come back to this. You can see what that is. It's good old modern cement that isn't appropriate. More of which coming up. Miracle cures in the Sunday papers, aren't they great? What was the one heading? One advert said solves all roof problems instantly. That's a great claim, isn't it? From a bit of spray foam. They pretend it has insulation value. When you do a loft conversion, you've got to put about 150 of Kingspan polyurethane on between the rafters and under the rafters. Not a centimetre of badly sprayed foam. I mean, that's got as much insulation as a tea towel. The guy on the right was seduced by the leaflet from, I don't know, Never Paint Again, what are they called? Whatever it is that promises a life of zero maintenance. The guy on the left has got a wonderful, you couldn't get more contrasting pair of terraces. An original, beautifully restored house next to one that's been, well, ruined, I would say. Two interesting examples. Next category, changing environment. Speaks for itself. Good old Japanese knotweed. Well, any house with the name Sea View or Cliff Top, I would advise caution. Certainly take a short lease on it. So environmental change is a factor with some defects, clearly. And lifestyles. We like hot indoor atmospheres. We emit huge amounts of water vapour. So do our pets and so do our children. Solar panels, all these mod cons that weren't, the Victorians didn't imagine this in their wildest dreams. And it can have effects, putting loads on roofs, that kind of thing. But I think the most interesting one is the good old botches that you find that, despite the fact that Victorians were great at, in some ways, the more expensive properties can be superb, clearly. So missing fire break walls. You know, the guy living at number 1 can go and see his girlfriend at number 13 and claim to have never left the house because he nips through the roof space. Another common botch was this thing where the rear addition, and I think it's one surveyors get claims on sometimes, only single width brick as opposed to 9-inch, the full length of a brick. Unusual to be two-storey, and you know, they're perilously thin walls. Apart from anything else, they're prone to condensation and damp. We had a structural engineer look at that and they okayed it, but I think there's some question marks over what you would do with that. You certainly dry line it and I think make sure it was strengthened with ceiling joists. The cheapest way to build a wall with a limited number of bricks is to stick them on their sides, brick on edge. So you can see they're unusually high, those. That's a Flemish bond wall. And it kind of forms a cavity wall, but it's very thin. It's rare, but not unusual. They tend to be rendered, you know, to make the surveyor's life more difficult, as the single width brick extension was. It's not, you can't immediately see the pattern, so you can miss those. Cast iron downpipes built into walls are clearly subject to rust and damp. But I think these are the well-known Victorian defects. Shallow foundations, perhaps 1/2 metre or less. Footings, I should say, because, you know, sticking out like feet. Main walls that have no restraints, particularly flank walls at the end of terraces or semis, side walls. We'll see a bit more later. Oh, there's one. So you've got spreader plates and tie bars that hold those in, retrospectively fitted, of course. Thin walls, wherever they could save money on thin walls, the back, the bay. Kind of weedy floor structures that were just about okay until somebody decided to cut joists for pipe runs. Joist ends embedded in damp brickwork. Fire break walls missing, as we've seen. And, you know, valley gutters that you can't see, hoppers that get blocked. Common problems. But the point is, whatever the defect, when they get really bad, the net result is either damp and rot and ultimately structural collapse, structural movement. So I think for the rest of this presentation we want to focus on these two areas. Damp is an interesting one because there's arguments rage amongst surveyors whether is there such a thing as rising damp. Many would say no. So, this is the question. How were Victorian houses designed to cope with damp and movement? Right, damp. Well, the bricks are much more porous than modern bricks, and the lime mortar is much weaker. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? It's a bit of a cliche, I know. Everybody knows about breathing, the breathing cycle, where the rain gets absorbed to some extent into the surface of the wall, and then when the sun comes out, it evaporates away. That's how it works, in and out. Cycle, known as breathing. Or they might use cladding sometimes to protect walls, but they'd still be breathable. So this is interesting. This is how it's supposed to work. You can see that when the sun comes out, the trapped moisture escapes via the mortar joints. That's the escape route. Over 100 years or so, it wears them a bit. Sacrificial mortar, so hence the need for repointing eventually. The problem is that we're now discovering is the advice that surveyors used to give out turns out to be completely wrong. In other words, you don't repoint in hard mortar because that bungs up the escape route. So the moisture has no option. Either it's trapped and comes into the house, or else it tries to get out through the masonry. When it does that, the frost gets it. The frost expands the water and it blows the face off the brick, or it could be the salts, crystallizing salts that come up. They also, when they crystallize, they expand, likewise blow the face off the brick or stone. So that's the unhappy truth with so many buildings you see now, where builders perhaps, I mean, they think they're doing the right thing because it used to be that modern was best. Cement is stronger, cement is easier to use, you can use it all year round. Victorian floors defended themselves via ventilation, certainly under, as we all know, under timber floors. But even solid floors, you'd have joints where the moisture could wick out. They were permeable. Meanwhile, you've got a flow of air coming into the fireplaces that are going 24/7 in the old days, so the air wafts away any damp. It all makes sense. The air circulation. As opposed to modern construction, which is designed to be bulletproof, the water doesn't come in. It's impermeable. A rigid barrier against moisture. Skin of hard masonry. So, and modern buildings, deep foundations, rigid structures, no problem. The problem is when you combine the two. So trying to change the way old buildings work by putting rigid, brittle, modern materials like cement, render or pointing causes problems because shallow foundations, old buildings move with the seasons. They're like living things. They move around, they shuffle about a bit, particularly on clay. That's the way they operate. But of course rigid materials crack. They can't cope with that. The water gets in, it can't get out. It gets trapped, it causes problems. And then we go along and misdiagnose it as rising damp. And then a bloke in a van comes along, because the mortgage lenders have insisted, and they want a guarantee, and he drills holes. We'll see some shocking examples. I hope you're prepared for some shocking images of damp proofing, because, you know, it's amazing what they get away with. Yeah, these are extreme examples of what cement can do in the wrong hands. So why all the fuss about that? There is a view that there's a lot of hysteria about damp. I mean, big deal. You get a bit of damp, what's the problem? Old buildings have damp patches, you know, live with it, deal with it. The problem is, clearly, when you've got any timber, particularly structural timber, in the vicinity, then, you know, there are issues. For example, beetle infestation, something like 15% moisture and above is an invitation to the creepy crawlies. There's our friend, the common furniture beetle. But you know, most examples, you're going to see these in most houses of a certain age. Certainly, I think, certainly pre-war, most of them have been treated already. Most are not active. Most only affect the outer sapwood, not the heartwood. So it's pretty rare for beetle to be an issue. It's just that when you put, you know, surveyors have this vocabulary that is incredibly scary to the people who read our reports. Asbestos, radon, beetle infestation. I mean, that's Doctor Who stuff. People run a mile when they see this. It's, you know, we have to be careful with our language. I do believe a lot of people pull out of house purchases because they've just seen that word asbestos. Asbestos cement soffits. Well, it wouldn't apply in a Victorian house necessarily, but, you know, and they run a mile. They see it and they, and I think we have a duty to explain, you know, whether something is an issue or not. Anyway, the point is that damp, the solution to these problems, and this is a claim, by the way, against the surveyor who missed it, the top image is wet rot under the floor. You haven't got X-ray vision, but putting two and two together, the air bricks are non-existent or blocked up. There's a bit of damp in the walls, therefore there's a good chance there's something lurking under the floorboards. Let me tell you, if your toilet is furry, worry. That's time to worry. You know, that gets a red, by the way. We usually get a curry joke from the audience at this stage, but you're too well bred, I'm sensing. Right, the true causes of damp. It's not unusual to have a bit of damp. Penetrating damp, well, you know, leaking downpipes, leaking windowsills, you name it. It comes through the wall, not necessarily at a low level, but it can be at a low level, and it's not rising damp. Gets misdiagnosed. Yeah, water coming down flues. Actually, it's interesting because in the old days, again with the fires going all the time, rain comes down the flue, it soaks into the masonry, and the constant waft of warm air escaping carries the damp out. Then we line our flues with steel liners, and they're rarely used, the fireplaces, so the water comes to charge. There's a great big pond in your fireplace because there's nothing for it to soak into. So that's a modern variation on that problem. Good old condensation, classic black mould, which is well known. Plumbing leaks, the brown staining, more typical of a roof or plumbing leak. Now that's a friend of mine. Last year we did the same presentation, and he was in the audience, and I said, "Ken, shall I point you out?" And he said, "No, no, no." But what kind of damp is that? It's a bit difficult. Huh? Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to define because the cause of that problem is the incoming cold supply that was leaking. And you know, you don't see it, so it leaks for months, years maybe. It looks like rising damp. If you put a wall in a sea of water, there's going to be something looking like rising damp. But the solution isn't to go drilling DPCs, it's to solve the cause of the problem. So they replace you can see they've got plastic pipework they put in there. So they've solved the cause of the problem and then let it dry out, deal with any salts, that kind of thing. Salt contamination, where it's been damp, you've got in the trail of the water comes sulfates and nitrates out of the earth in the building materials. And if you replaster too quickly, and here they've used modern gypsum plaster, which conservationists wouldn't say is a good thing because it's not breathable, then clearly you've got problems that should have been dealt with earlier. So the source of the damp needs to be rectified. It needs time to dry. Salt's brushed off or hoovered, but you mustn't use water solution because that just puts them back into the wall. And they're hygroscopic, so they actually absorb when the atmosphere is moist. The salts attract it back in, and it looks like you've got the same damp problem, but it's a different one. So here's the thing: DPCs, as everybody knows, were only required from 1875. Is there such a thing as rising damp? Well, Stephen Boniface, who was the head of the RICS Conservation Faculty, says it's a myth. It's a complete waste of money. Now, you know, if you're confronted by that, going around a house, stick your damp meter in, and it starts singing. What's the cause? Well, you might think it's rising damp, but you only have to look outside. High ground levels. I mean, that's pretty obvious. They're not all that obvious, are they? But again, you know, if you're an inexperienced surveyor might, you know, if you're being lazy, you might just say, oh, it's got... I mean, the thing is, mortgage lenders have this kind of limited knowledge, and they like to translate what we say into their language and then get a guarantee, as I said before, for an injected damp-proof course. Really, the two main causes of damp to lower walls are excessively wet ground and high ground levels. You know, it's not rocket science. The thing is that it's not sexy doing maintenance. You don't get a piece of paper with a guarantee, but that's the thing that needs to be done to solve the problem. Damp is compounded by modern paints and modern cements and gypsum plasters, which keep the damp trapped. That just makes it worse. You can almost feel the wall trying to breathe behind that coating of kind of vinyl. It's trapped behind the paint or the render. So that's the kind of masonry paint that's got a sort of elastic texture. One thing interesting, as you go around older properties, you see past attempts at trying to fix things that didn't work. There's one. Anybody come across those before? A strange device known as electro-osmotic system. The thinking was that if you transmitted a weak electric current on a wire around your mortar joints at DPC level, that would somehow cause damp to retreat. It didn't work. This is a better idea, these ceramic tubes. Dalton was the brand name, very often. And here the damp in the wall was attracted to the tube, and then it would evaporate through the hole naturally. The only thing is, they used to block up with salts in time and became useless. There is a modern version of that, the Shriver method you see advertised, that's a bit sort of, looks like a climbing wall when you stick them on your wall. The nuclear option, get your chainsaw out and cut the joints out and shove in a plastic DPC, which, I mean, old buildings are sensitive. They don't like being brutalised. And it may not be necessary anyway. Damp sealants, again, have a habit of trapping damp. This whole thing about injected DPCs, can you see what's happened there? They've been along once and injected it a bit too high, and then they got called back again and thought, I know, we'll do another one even higher. If you think about it, the main risk with rising damp, or what appears to be rising damp, is to the floor structure on a Victorian timber floor. So really it should be, the barrier should be beneath where the joists are, but very, very rarely is. So the theory is that you put a silicon-based fluid and it forms a new barrier, but what often happens is they need a lift of scaffolding to put the DPC in. Far too high. It's meant to be through the mortar joints anyway, not actually into the brick. Because if you don't, the moisture can still get past it. And then of course what they do is the guarantee is dependent on it being rendered, tanked with render on the inside, so it looks like they've solved the problem. But again, under the floor, you can have raging damp, but nobody knows. So that's the vulnerable bit, it's the bit you're standing on. So what are the solutions to damp issues? Well, they're kind of obvious. You know, you fix the leak for a start, external leaks, and you fix internal leaks, the enemy within. Windowsills, rarely that bad, but you know the throating, the drip groove on the outside that projects the water away. Very often they're blocked. Replacement windows, quite often you see the sill does not project sufficiently from the wall, so it just dribbles down the wall into the masonry, and you've got a damp patch under your window, compounded by condensation. Typical stuff you see. Your heart sinks, doesn't it, when you see these things? Oh. Or taped flashings at roof level. I mean, why do it? Good old valley gutters, hoppers, ye olde leaking water butt. That's a potential source of problems. Solution number 2, prevent death by suffocation. What does that mean? Well, you use good old lime mortar as opposed to cement. So that's a past botch with cement repointing, and then, cut a long story short, that's the guy finishing off the nice. It's even got a nice colour, isn't it? Feels natural, feels nice. The only thing is you can't use it in very cold conditions, so over the winter, lime, I think the first 18 months it doubles in strength, lime. It takes a long time to set, so it's a different mindset to cement. Obviously you reduce high ground levels, we all know that. Perhaps put a French drain of gravel next to the wall to help it breathe, damp escape. And get the moisture. So many problems are caused by steamy air condensing on the solid walls that are cold. And people always think they've got a damp problem, but it's not really. It's just a question of getting rid of the steamy air and insulating. Well, stop boiling food if you can, or stop drying your clothes indoors. It's difficult in this country, isn't it? But you know, ventilate. Open a window now and again. Trickle vents, not a bad thing. And insulate, you know, with the insulated plasterboard, like Kingspan, Celotex. Perhaps even, I don't know, 30 mil plus the plasterboard. You can buy it in DIY stores and just, you know, fix that to the walls. That should, I think with a vapour barrier would be a good idea as well. that would transform the problem of condensation. Interestingly, the Victorian terrace is actually quite a neat little number to try and insulate. And you can see here, well, you've got other houses on either side in this case, so that rules out having to insulate the party walls. But to the rear, it is possible, I think, aesthetically, to insulate externally, external wall insulation. Internally, clearly you lose a bit of floor space, but not much. So you could do this on the main part of the house, and that on the flank wall or on the rear, without mucking up the architectural integrity. I mean, that's quite a good one. You can argue the windows are not particularly original looking, but it's technically better to insulate externally, but it's the most expensive. And when you've got aesthetic issues, you don't want to ruin the curb appeal of an old house at the front, but the back, I think you can get away with it. And then finally, I think you need to leave time. Famously, it's about a month to dry out for every inch of wall, so what's that, 9 months when it's been damp, and get rid of all that undergrowth. And be careful who you employ. This guy's great, Mike Parra. He writes for the RSCS now and again, and he's got it's a good website actually, dampbuster.com. It's got some great pictures, including one damp problem. They couldn't figure it out in a cavity wall until they took the bricks out, and they found the cause of the problem was a builder's donkey jacket that had got, as a prank when they were building it in the 70s, they shoved his jacket down the cavity, and it still had the old Hoban tobacco in the pocket. Right, move. How did old houses cope with movement? Well, on the plus side, detached houses are generally worth more than semis. The cause of that is an illegal basement conversion, by the way, in case you're wondering. Typical kinds of movement you encounter with Victorian houses, where the ceiling joists are no longer holding the walls together, so they push the top of the walls out, roof spread. That in turn can cause the purlins to drop, and then you get cracking at the edges of the gable wall. And the solution is to really connect the bottom of the rafters, or somewhere near the bottom. This is a quote by TV surveyor celebrity Marianne Sir, who famously did the Griff Rhys-Jones programmes. What do you think? Is that true? Or is that a bit too, conservationists can be a bit, because, I mean, the thing is, there's something in this, right? But you take the ground away, wash the ground away from under any wall, it's going to collapse, So subsidence being the loss of the ground, irrespective of the buildings. But anyway, the thing is that old buildings clearly move, like I was saying, with the seasons, because the foundations are shallow. Therefore, the structures need to be more flexible. Now here's the thing, you do see some quite entertaining examples of movement, and you're thinking, blimey, is that what it used to be? But it's okay. There's that thing where an old building has moved, but you don't need to go into panic mode because it's settled. It's found, like she was saying, it's found this more comfortable way of standing up somehow. And how does that happen? Because lime allows a building to distort rather than crack. It's flexible. This amazing thing where the rain can, once it gets into a crack, it can bring out particles of lime and kind of self-heal. I mean, there's limits, clearly, to the kind of cracking that can solve. But they deform. In other words, the cracking stress is shared whereas with a modern wall, the crack goes straight down at the point of impact. Lime lets it be shared. This, of course, is going a step too far for lime. Any suggestions?
Foundation.
Yeah, yes, and
The bait was added after the building.
well, that's a possibility, but in this case, it's the words you don't want to read in a survey: illegal basement conversion next door. Well, actually, this isn't the same one, but you do, in the press, you do get these banker apologises stories occasionally. So yeah, the guy next door was doing an illegal conversion involving excavation under the party wall without building regs. But you know, that's, I mean, it is, it's scary, isn't it? Even when you know what you're doing. God, you know, you don't want to be project managing that one. Because they'll save money, you know, by not hiring any plant. And they have 10 blokes all in the rain trying to, and well, you know. So, claims against surveyors with Victorian houses are very often linked to illegal structural alterations, not just basement conversions. So, roofs reclad, that's a bit of an old one now, with the big old concrete tiles. Slate being very light, of course, the original slate, incredibly light. You know, internal walls, yeah, it looks so nice. But as a surveyor, what's going through your mind is, what have they done here? And it turns out they've taken the whole spine wall out. Well, okay, fine. Did they get building regs? If so, where are the loadings now moved to? The party walls, which were built by the apprentices with the cheap bricks and covered up quick and may not be very strong. Here's a claim against a surveyor. You can see that because it's got Exhibit E, my lad, went to court. Not one of mine, I hasten to say. Can you see what's happened there? Somebody's taken out the chimney breast. They've cut through the joists, but they haven't done anything to support the tons of masonry that are still there upstairs. And this is what you can't, this is typical, isn't it? You see, up in the loft, they've taken out the chimney breast to the bedroom, and there's a couple of matchsticks holding it up as a token gesture. Well, I'm afraid that's not good enough. This may or may not be good enough. It used to be gallows brackets. I believe building control prefer to see a steel now, but of course steels need somewhere to be supported, which isn't always so easy. Maybe okay, depends. Here's a question. Typical Victorian terrace. If you were to rip out a downstairs wall, which one would it be? Bearing in mind, you've got roof loadings to support, even though it's on the ground floor. You've got upstairs floor joists. You may have a wall directly above that's being supported, and there may even be lateral support at either end, which kind of covers most options. But do you think there's one you could take out without having to invest in a set of acros? Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that's one. Yeah. Any more?
Kitchen and the scullery.
Yeah, that's it. The kitchen and the scullery. I think, should you want to, the one between the hallway and the front and the front parlour, because you've got a big bedroom upstairs going right across. There's no, if the joists are going front to rear, of course, which you assume they would be in a typical Victorian house. The kitchen, the joists are probably going side to side, so yeah, you could take out that scullery wall. That's, you know, typical spine wall. And I mean, personally, I think they're great, you know, but people do like to take them out, and that's the main, you know, as the name would suggest, the main load-bearing wall in the whole house. Bay movement is a common thing, and here they've, well, you can see pictures don't always communicate the severity. You can have quite a serious defect, it doesn't always look that bad on the picture, but you can see the brick piers have bowed out quite a bit. You can see that at some point they've reclad the roof in horrible Redland concrete interlocking tiles with a bit of token gesture flashing mortar fillet stuck on, and the timber lintel has rotted presumably, hence the arch has dropped. Although I think, again, I think a structural engineer will probably need to decide on whether it needs rebuilding or not, but certainly a fair amount of overhaul to the upper half anyway. Oh, and the lower half. Here's one that, the surveyor's website, they had an example of differential movement. And the problem with differential movement, where you've got an extension, where the foundations are a different depth to the main house, the structures are going to move at different rates, therefore you're going to get cracking. And the problem is, if you try and stitch in the brickwork, no matter how beautifully it's done, how skilled they are, the pressures are going to re-establish the cracks. So you really do want an expansion joint of some kind to accommodate future movement. This is a strange one. Victorian houses where the basement is only half the footprint. You've got different depths, clearly, of foundation. And this is what it looks like in real life. Take a deep breath. Wow, that's a good crack, isn't it? So you see what's happened there. That's the shallow bit has moved, and the deeper bit hasn't. Whoops. And apparently this was compounded by the fact that the sewer pipe, the underground drain, cracked, caused by the movement, and then the ground became marshy, and it sank even more, and then became a squat. So that's a peculiar, perhaps Georgian, Victorian issue. Well, of course, not all movement is a problem, and it's not unusual to find sloping floors on old buildings that have settled and found a position of repose, because the internal walls didn't have much foundation in the first place. This is a common issue with the bowing to side walls, because there's no lateral support, and again, common to stitch it in with tie bars or something along those lines. The thing about arches, I think, is that you've always got to think about the fact they move outwards, sideways. Here, it looks like this, I don't know what the story is here, but it looks like something's been taken out that may have been supporting that arch, the pressure being sideways, and it's just split. So the thrust, you know, where you've got a flank wall, end of terrace, say, or a semi, there's always that pressure pushing out that one needs to be mindful of. And interestingly, you know, you occasionally get a tunnel through it's more like 1920s typically, but you do come across them with Victorian. Sometimes I think the back-to-backs in Birmingham have got these. So the thing is, very often there's a fireplace or an internal wall. If you take those out, then the side force from the arch is pushing against nothing. So that's a sort of unintended consequence of a home improvement that could go horribly wrong. And I think the thing is, once you've solved the cause of the structural movement, then there's all kinds of neat remedies with helibars and so on that can be inserted with resin, grouting, whatever. And they can make it look good as new in the right hands. But you do need to fix the cause of the problem first. Subsidence, well, interestingly, with Victorian rear additions, because the drains typically come out the back, and there's often no inspection chamber. They've been there 130 years or whatever. It's a common cause of marshy ground and then subsidence, because the ground's been washed away underneath the foundations. So what's the solution? If you underpin, again, it's interesting, isn't it? If you've ever tried to sell a car with a new engine and everybody's suspicious, and it's the same with underpin. A house that's been underpinned, that's why mortgage lenders ask that question, has it got any history of underpinning? Well, if it was such a great solution, why would insurers refuse to insure a house that's been underpinned? Because there's a stigma. It's a weird thing, isn't it? You come up with a solution, but it's so worrying that they won't insure it. So how good a solution can that be? And here's the problem, that you could underpin a whole front wall of a terrace, and all it does is push the impact area, the stress point, further along, because it's one structure, a whole terrace. And again, the conservationists would say you would do something a bit gentler, which is to underbuild. Again, having solved the leak, or whatever it was, the tree, the leak, you would then underbuild with masonry to reinstate the kind of ground that was there in the first place, the support. Great big concrete boots are a bit too heavy-handed. So, okay, well that brings us towards the end of the presentation, and I think from a valuation point of view, there are things people do, and they're well-intentioned, but sadly they reduce the value of the house. Now, if you look at the house on the right, this was a cottage, a pair of semi-detached cottages built in the 1870s, and instant character transplant. How about that? So there's he's not very popular, this guy, because the neighbours the neighbours' houses have been lost value thanks to his DIY effort. Right. Thanks for that. But this one is the best. Keep an eye on the house on the right, and he's just knocked off 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds. For a weekend's work and 500 quid, you can knock off 20,000 of the value of your house. There you go. So I'm not suggesting you do this. It's just an example of crazy things people do. Anyway, for more scary pictures, the ideal Christmas present. There you go. So I hope that's been of some use. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Would anyone like to ask any questions, please? One thing you talked about was drainage systems you find in Victorian properties. What you often find is the double-storey partition moving out slightwards, and there's no inspection chamber for you to check the drainage system.
Yeah.
It's a common problem with, I guess, 67% of a lot of double-storey partitions.
Yeah.
Do you think you should just monitor it, or?
Well, yeah, that's the first case, isn't it? But if you've got a leaking drain, then it's going to get worse over time, clearly. So you've probably got to excavate a trial pit, see what the problem is. Yeah, it's never easy, is it?
Would anyone like to ask anything? Yes, sir.
Just sticking with drainage, do you think drainage is probably the biggest single cause of movement in Victorian houses?
I think certainly of subsidence, of that kind of movement. You've got the bowing out of walls and roof spread and other things, but because you've got tree roots that seek out water through joints, so they get into the drain. I mean, I think the best solution with tree roots is to put down a root barrier, to dig a huge trench and put down a root barrier to keep them away from the drains. But yeah, I think the fact that they're out of sight, out of mind drains is there's probably every second house ought to have drainage work, and it's difficult in surveys, isn't it? Because you lift up the chamber covers and you can sometimes get an educated guess as to what the problem is, but you can't see the full story. Yeah, it's an area to be aware of for sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Any further questions at all, please? Sir.
Slides for the presentation, are they going to be available?
Yeah,
Already,
there's 3 parts, PDFs, and one I think they've put on their website already, but there's parts 2 and 3 I'm promised are there now, or at least tomorrow, or at least after Christmas. But they're going to do it, so you can just download them. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Have you got a view on taking paint off of brickwork on reinstating?
Well, I think the paint issue is that brickwork shouldn't be painted, but sometimes it is. So again, it's that thing where modern paint will seal in damp. How best to remove it? Well, yeah, it's not easy to get it right, but a poultice can sometimes work well. Chemical strippers can be a bit strong for old masonry. Certainly stonework, there's a lot of buildings that got damaged where they applied very strong methods with chemicals or sandblasting, either to strip paint or to get the coatings of soot and so on off. And they've damaged them, even in Oxford, the university buildings, limestone being particularly vulnerable. And I think steam is the best thing actually. These steam strippers, they use, for cleaning, basically soap and water is the right approach for cleaning. But for paint stripping, I think, steaming and scraping, I would say, probably the best option.
Moving on to that, what about removing render?
Well, that's a good question because the thing about render, if it's cement render and it's modern and it's inappropriate, it's incredibly grippy. So the worry is that it can pull the face off. You hack it off and it brings the soft face of the brick or stone with it. So that's not a problem if you're going to re-render it in lime render, because clearly you're hiding the face of the brick. But if you wanted to try and restore the original brickwork to be displayed, then that would be an issue, I think. If you're going to re-render it in lime, that's fine. Hack it off.
Where I live just now in Walthamstow, there's a movement to a lot of properties have been rendered.
Yeah.
They're removing the render. And surely that must damage it. But not re-rendering, but surely that must be damaging the brick. So
Yeah.
You're doing more damage
Yeah.
than what they are. It looks great when it's done, it's all really pointed and lines, etc. But
Yeah.
you're fundamentally damaging the brick,
Yeah.
which will then in years to come.
And they're Victorian buildings.
Victorian and Edwardian.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, that the bricks are much softer than modern bricks, and the face is strong enough. But again, it's a bit like if you take a sanding disc to brickwork and you sand off the face, then you've got the weaker inside that's now on the front line with the weather.
I've gone past, I've seen when they've hacked it up and they've got the grinder with the bits that haven't come off in there.
Yeah.
Grinding the base of the brick, the last of the cement off.
I think you'd be worried about that. There were strong bricks. Clearly engineering bricks are fantastically strong. They use them for railway arches and whatnot, but rarely much in buildings other than black decorative stripes made of engineering bricks. So but they might have been glazed bricks. If they're particularly strong ones, then they might be okay. But I think you're right to be concerned. The developers may not appreciate that, unfortunately.
Okay, any further questions at all, please? Yes, sir. Last question, sir.
Just are insurers listening time to underpin nowadays, in terms of remediation for...
I think the thing about mortgage lenders and insurers is old habits die hard. And it's a funny paradox, that, because an insurer will, as I say, often refuse to, when you're selling a house that's been underpinned, the buyer may have to stick with the same insurer you've got because the new insurer won't take it on. It's more likely the mortgage lender that will be involved. So it's a bit of a grey area, that. I think there's no easy answer because every house is different. If you underpin the whole of a detached house, then you'd be on solid ground, you know, because
So the risk is differential movement between
yeah,
the hard bit that's been underpinned and
yeah,
the softer one.
exactly. Yeah, it's just pushing the problem further down. That's the thing. But I think it all comes back to this logical point that you have to look for the cause of the problem. And so often, and I hate to say this, but surveyors have been guilty of addressing the symptoms, covering up, you know, certainly with damp issues, they've been guilty of covering up the problem, egged on by mortgage lenders. If you can identify the cause of the problem and treat it, then, you know, that's the way to proceed.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian.
Yeah.
Really interesting talk.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.
If you have the feedback sheet, can you bring it to the table, please?
Yeah. Yeah, pleasure.
How would you draw the line, where would you draw the line between differential settling and subsidence? So if you see kind of the joint in masonry
Yeah.
kind of spreading
Yeah.
or having spread, but you don't know whether it's still moving, how would you know whether that's, or what, you know, in what circumstances would you call that subsidence and when would you call it
Okay, yeah.
differential settlement?
I see, okay, fair enough. The thing about subsidence, I mean, cracking is difficult to diagnose on the spot very often. But, I mean, there's certain key things with subsidence cracking, which that first of all, it tends to be diagonal.
Yeah.
Secondly, it tends to be stepped.
Yeah.
And thirdly, it tends to be tapered, so you've got a bigger gap, like a V, at the top. That's the classic sign of subsidence. It also goes all the way through the wall, so you can see it on the inside, on the solid wall. And there's that thing about, you know, if cracking's below DPC level, then you worry. If it's above, it's usually less of a concern. So I think it's those sort of rules of thumb that I mean, I certainly kind of use those when I'm trying to assess cracking. Because the thing about it's like subsidence is kind of where the ground is moved away, like a washed away, or there's mining or some, you know, the ground disappears for whatever reason, irrespective of the building. Whereas settlement is due to the pressure over time of the building pushing down, squeezing the ground. So that's the difference.
Okay.
And settlement's sort of containable, and subsidence isn't. But it's a bit like, again, the mortgage people, they have these kind of bête noire, you know, they have if you look back in time, subsidence used to be the great terrible thing, then it was flooding, and then it's Japanese knotweed. They get a bee in their bonnet.
Just because I've seen such a crack and I wasn't sure what it was, to be honest, really, whether it was one or the other, because it was basically in the party wall at high level, kind of in the loft, coming down to the ceiling of the ground floor, so floor of the first floor, kind of down basically the boundary between a 50s probably extension with a solid slab floor and the original building with its suspended timber floors. And
that sounds a bit like you've got the two
it's kind
structures.
of coming diagonally down to that boundary between the newer bits of the building and the older bit, and like the brickwork, and just kind of
I see,
ease the part by a couple of centimetres.
Well, I mean, a couple of centimetres is quite a significant crack. But I mean, that to me sounds like you've got differential movement with the new extension stuck on the back of an old building, moving at different rates. And like I say, if they would only put expansion joints in, that would, because people do, you know, cracking is such a worry for people, and in most cases they worry unnecessarily because old buildings move all through the year. It's normal. But if there's no flexible joints for them to move against, then it's going to look worse than it is. That's an interesting one, actually. But it sounds like differential movement rather than subsidence, from what you're saying. I mean, subsidence also tends to affect, you see it around the weak points of the openings for windows, the corners, stepped up. Not to be confused with when they've replaced the windows very often. They didn't think about the lintels, and so you get this step crack in both that pyramid. It's so common to see that. So I mean, it is difficult, I think, to come to a very quick decision because when you do progress a claim for cracking, the first thing you do is say monitor it for a year. So that like, they don't know. So the experts, the engineers, don't always know what the cause of the cracking is, but surveyors are meant to come up with an instant answer, and that's not always.
But that's what I wonder, because the building surveyor that I consulted said, "Oh, Phil, it's just differential settlement, and it's just settled where it is, and just have it filled."
Well, it depends. That can be. The thing about, is it progressive or is it historic? But then a lot of cracking is sort of seasonal, so it will open up and then it will close depending on the ground moving with the seasons. In which case, it's not really a problem. It's only if it keeps moving. Hence the need for monitoring over time. So
probably want to go back to the building surveyor to see about monitoring it.
Well, I think that's what they tend to say. The insurers will say monitor it with a telltale. They put over the crack and then they mark it every month or so to be sure. That's the way to really come to a decision.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Have you heard with tying in plank walls? I was on one of these courses, and instead of having an end plate, you can actually get a modern system that goes through the wall, and it leaves no mark on the outside, and it goes straight through the wall, through the joists, and then it's filled with an epoxy. And that just spreads into the wall, and so you can't see that there's actually.
Well, like they're called sem ties and bow ties, and.
But there's nothing on the outside. It's not the traditional spreader plate.
Well, I mean, it's.
I've heard of it, but.
Yeah, I mean, the worry would be that, say you use resin to bind some sort of steel, plate or something that's not visible. If the joints are a bit weak and the masonry is a bit weak, what's it pulling against? I worry. With the good old-fashioned spreader plate, it's obvious it's got a great big.
It's spreading the load. Whereas it doesn't. You can do, if you only tie it to one brick, as it moves, it'll just pull the brick out.
That's the way.
But I've seen a semi-detached house with 24-foot unsupported purlin. It's 1890s, and it's moved. But an engineer said probably moved about 100 years ago. It moved when it was green, and so it's stationary. And so there's probably nothing wrong with it. Just leave it. And so what it means is you've got a bit of a bow in the wall. But if it happened 80 years ago, it wasn't a big deal. So somebody will go, oh, you've got a bit of movement. But it was 80 years ago. It's not moved since.
Well, I think that's good advice. And I think the test of an experienced engineer or surveyor is when they often say, you don't need to worry. Pleasure.
We spend the cracks start changing.
When they keep or get worse over time. But I think in most cases you don't need to worry. Certainly, I mean, oak is notorious for movement when it's still green.
I know, but it won't move once it's seasoned.
No, it's
like Spanish Armada. They had to work it when it was green.
But that worries people. The great big shakes you get in oak.
But the
Shall I sit down? Good to see you.
Okay, good to see you. Yeah, thank you.
See you after Christmas.
Can we just delete the? It's just on here, isn't it?
Just take it.
That's good. All right.
It's all locked and it's all deleted.
Right.
Okay. And then do French drains work?
Well, there's, as always, there's two schools of thought. Basically, yes, they work, but the schools of thought are what size gravel you should put in, and there's a view you want to put quite chunky, I don't know, 30, 40 millimetre, very big chunks.
And presumably how wide does it need to be? I suppose it's got to be wider. Really, the limitation is it's down to how the person digging the trench can get in.
Well, but it doesn't have to be that deep. I think perhaps a foot would be sufficient. I think the thing about whether you have the big...
It's got to go down to below where if you've got an inner wall, It has to go presumably to at least the bottom of the wall, the floor.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you went down to the top of the footings, that will probably be enough, and that should be.
That's about 4 feet in this case.
Oh wow, that's not bad. You know,
That's a long way.
Yeah.
And to dig that out,
Yeah.
presumably you just dig it out and then you just put a barrier
Yeah.
and then fill it in, and you don't need to do anything else.
Well, no. I mean, the
You don't
idea
need to
is.
support the inside because where the soil is, provided you've got an impermeable barrier, that's job done.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
stone will keep it all in place.
I think all it is letting the damp in the lower wall evaporate. Yeah. So
Mm.
you've got these with bigger stones. You've got more space.
But then you don't want the moisture getting in, so you put a barrier to stop it getting in.
No, that's the thing. I mean,
Or over time, with damp, it'll fill in the cracks. If
no, that's the thing. I think the thing is that that used to be the way they thought that you kind of it was the idea that you put a barrier to stop rain getting in. But now
it's washing the silt in as well.
I think the trench only needs to be about a foot deep to let's say the bottom of the underfloor, and hopefully sloping out, so any moisture that gets in goes out. If it's quite moist ground, then I think you put a perforated pipe and it should discharge the water. But no, I mean the idea is to leave the wall as exposed as you can, the lower wall, to let damp evaporate out, so you wouldn't put any physical barrier at all. I mean,
No, a vertical barrier to stop. So you have. So if a blank page, if that's your wall,
yeah,
and that's the inside, and that's the soil,
yeah,
you would put a vertical barrier in to stop any moisture coming in this way, washing the dirt in and filling in the cracks, filling in the bits between the hardcore that you put in.
Well, you'd rather hope you wouldn't get much going in there. I mean, I think you would. I mean, you may need to wash it through every year or so. I don't know.
Oh, you just put a hose in it.
Yeah, I mean.
How ironic.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, the thing is, it's the time of year you do it.
Yeah.
You know, if you do it in a heat wave,
Yes.
then it all evaporates
Yes.
out. You know, so obviously you wouldn't do that in sort of really cold weather because it could cause make the damn problem worse. But I think that it's this sort of natural idea that left to its own devices, water will evaporate out of walls, and you won't have a damp problem anymore. And to help it at low level, having that French drain is just a way of getting air down to let it evaporate. Because you know, like all the Victorian houses I've owned, they've actually rendered the lower wall under the sill.
I've got no rendering. I've got paint on the rear,
All painted, yeah.
which has some green gunk on it, and it is a compromise between do you remove it aggressively or, and literally it was elbow grease with a scraper, scraping as much as I could.
Yeah.
And then painting it with a porous paint.
Yes.
And it was interesting speaking to the manufacturer. They said, don't put a smooth in, put a granular, because the granular moves rather than. Quite interesting that.
The paint?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was a Dulux paint and weather shield, and he said, and the technical line.
Yeah.
And they're very helpful people always. They said, if you wanted it to move, put more flexibility in it. Put the granular on, not the smooth, because the granules will allow it to move a bit more than if it's just a solid paint.
Well, I think moving is one thing, but the question is it breathable?
Well, say it is.
Yeah, well, this is the problem, that sometimes they use the word breathable. For example, I've just put a rubber, EPDM rubber roof on, a flat roof, and they say it's breathable. It obviously isn't, because, you know, it's the same stuff as car tyres are made of.
Yeah.
So I think
It depends on the pressure that you put it on.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Yes, it will. If you put it
So
to
they-
1,000 psi
they
or whatever, will burst it.
Well, yeah, I mean, they use this word breathable, and sometimes it's a sort of marketing comment. I think.
But I would imagine the technical people, they wouldn't put on weather shield microporous if it wasn't.
Well, you'd rather hope so. I mean, there are specialist manufacturers. There's one called Earthborn that do clay paints, and there's a sort of little subsection of paint manufacturers that are small who do specialise in microporous and breathable. And and it's something conservationists can get quite hot under the collar about.
They don't have to pay for it.
No, well, because they're dearer. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's interesting. I went on another and a spout. Somebody did spout.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, really very interesting, and it was all about insulating solid walls and insulating the outside, and saying basically your weakest point is you would externally insulate the wall of a fairly standard Victorian terrace, and it took 46 tubes of mastic. Now that isn't going to last.
Yeah.
And what they said was that whoever the research construction industry research board or whoever it was, they'd done some informal research that basically the U value of a dry solid wall is so much better than a wet solid wall, and just dries out, and that made the U value dramatically different. Me, I've done what you shouldn't do. I've gone and put kitchen and bathroom plates in my kitchen, which is it's 2 feet below ground. And so I've got.
Well, that's tricky actually, because
and so I've got
it's a semi-basement really.
I've got it's bubbling in certain places, and all I can really do is just sack it off and put some waterboarding on. And
you can't excavate externally.
Well, that's where my French drain comes in.
Yeah.
But it's how much do you dig out?
Yeah.
And then start to affect the integrity of
foundations.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
right.
I've got a wall I've got a roof with that's got a bow in it.
Yeah.
But an engineer said it's fine.
Yeah.
He says it's moved, but it probably moved 100 years ago.
Yeah. No, that's good advice.
Different builders came round and said, oh well, I'll put in a 9mm plate on either side of it and all the way along, and da-di-da-di-da, and basically they haven't got a clue.
No.
And some said, oh well, I'll put a 20-foot pearl in it.
Yeah.
And the engineer said, no, it's fine.
Well, good for him, because that's the right answer.
So, yes.
Yeah. I mean, because movement goes with the territory of old buildings, and people do
they
over worry about
it. They poo their pants over it.
Well, and builders also. I mean, builders are very practical.
Good ones are.
Yeah,
I think not wishing to sound disparaging about the East Europeans go, oh, why do you want new? Why do you want old? And so they're not used to working with old buildings, and so they go, oh, rip it out and dry line it and.
Well, actually, I think most builders, in my experience, come from that school of thinking. Certainly with ceilings, Well, I think what it is, they don't like mucking about with small repairs. They like doing big stuff. Get the diggers in, knock it all down, start again. They think big, because it's time consuming and it also requires a lot of skill.
They're not in the business of helping people, they're in the business of the commercial.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you said about the plaster, that again, I thought, well, the roof leaks, but where I re-roofed, and the interesting thing is, you can do all this work, and if you wait 2 years, that if you're supposed to have building regs, 2 years, and there's no enforcement after 2 years.
Yeah, it's interesting, that, isn't it?
And I had a dormer, and I put lead on it.
Yeah.
It's the best material for it.
Lead is, yeah, sure.
But it's expensive, but job done, finished.
Oh, fantastic.
And it looks a lot better than what was there. And the opening was a Howden's window and whatever it was.
Yeah.
But just the gap, they put gypsum plaster. I thought, oh, it leaks.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't. It's just wicking everything out, and then you can seal it with some stuff. And it's quite interesting. Even as a GP surveyor, you look at it and go, my roof leaks, when in fact all it is it's just wicked, and now plaster. It doesn't. It's got a dark colour to it.
Yeah.
And you can sort it out, but
no.
I think lime plasters, lime mortar's brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
They don't like using it.
No, I mean I can understand why, because you've got different types of lime.
Yes.
And what type you use. There's a lime putty that's good for really sort of medieval buildings.
Yeah.
With rotten and daub. Then you've got the NHLs, and the 3.5 is sort of middle ground. 7 is more like cement. So
your average brickie doesn't.
No,
like
they don't. And also, I think the thing is, they don't like being called back. I've known the ones who, what they do is they pretend they're doing line work and they shove in Cemex cement, or white cement, and it looks like it.
Yeah. And the land of the blind.
Yeah, I know.
But it's interesting. The ex-district valuer around, he did some development. He did all sorts of things, but he basically said when we were rendering a wall, it was not builder's sand, it was sharp, so there was no globules of mud in it.
Yeah.
He said I'd get my best oppo who was mixing the mortar, because the plasterers don't like it because it's really hard. He said on a matter of life or death, this is the way that you make it, and don't listen to a word of what they say. And then it makes it works, because if you use builder's sand, I think it is, it just ruins it. And you're not going to notice it for a year or so, but make the right stuff in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
But it's a very different
but
approach.
they don't like
No,
doing
the
it.
trouble, I mean, what I find with builders, with trades, is you kind of sit down with them and you go through what you want and you do a little drawing and show them, and they go, yeah. And it's completely ignored.
And then it's some ladder one side.
Well, yeah.
Or, yeah.
I mean, the good ones will pick up on what you're saying, and
they'll help you.
They'll get it, yeah. But the majority is, I mean, what it is, they spent their life doing a particular trade. They don't want some jumped up bloody surveyor, who doesn't, legal surveyors, telling them what to do. So there's that.
Yeah.
And then they genuinely think they know how to do it, and you do it better than that. So
why do you do it this way? We've all done it. I always say it this
I've
way.
had that. I've had it. But look, we've done 20 years. We've done it this way, and
We've been doing it for 20
God,
years.
the trouble, bloody hell. It's like I said, I said I wanted it done. Oh God. And that's when you're, that's when you're around on the job.
Yeah, there are
If you're
key
not-
moments. Yes. It was interesting with the dormer that I had to replace. I phoned the Lead Society. The Lead.
Oh, they're great. The Lead Sheet
Brilliant.
Association.
Yes.
Aren't
And
great?
they said, "Oh, do it, but make sure you've got a 50 mil gap and what have you." And the builders go,
I had the same problem.
but I think it works. And then not just that, it's I want a insect mesh.
Oh God, yeah. Funny you should say that.
And
because that's
so
on
I
my
bought
slang
it myself and I put it. But you've got to watch them.
Oh, yeah, okay.
His builder was very good, but the builder, the owner, it is. It's watching them on site at the right moment.
But even then, things get missed.
Yeah.
You can be around most of the time, and they miss stuff that you told them to do.
You don't notice it for 2 years.
And why do you want code 6 lead? And you think, well, that's because the Lead Sheet Association specify it. And you go, oh, what do they know?
A bit more than you, mate. Fortunately, the guy that did the lead was very good.
Yeah.
And he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I have to say, he was business.
Yeah.
And
I love to see good lead work.
Oh, he did it right
great,
and everything, and he knew, it was a baking hot day, and it must have been 25-30 degrees, and by about 3 o'clock they couldn't work with it. It was just too hot.
Yeah.
And it's time to go home.
Expands like mad.
But even when they delivered it, I was thinking, don't leave it there, they're going to nick it. But
Yeah,
of course,
no, you do think that.
you're thinking, what do you need?
Yeah. Mind you, I've made the mistake of buying lead online, because there's a thing called Roofing Superstore that the
No,
prices
I
are
like to
good.
see it.
But then I had to send them back.
No, it's the materials aren't the expensive bit. It's getting the right person to do it.
Yeah.
And no, they did a brilliant job.
Yeah.
All the right fixings and what have you, and just seeing them do it.
Yeah.
And you think, I could actually do it. It's the welding bit and you
Yeah.
just see how they just a little bit where it turns up and
Yeah. No, it's so skilled.
yeah.
It's great. I mean, I do admire trades that are that good. I mean, most of them are pretty good. It's just when you take them out of their comfort zone and you want something they haven't done before, then they don't like it, and it's a problem really. Even though, I mean, it's that thing where the trades blame the designer. When you pick them up on something, the first.
Well, there was no design. They just because it wasn't big enough to.
Yeah.
It's not a big enough. They did it in 2 weeks. It wasn't.
Yeah.
They're building it as they go along, so you've got to go. Right, this is the fall I want, and da 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 da.
Yeah,
da, da.
yeah. What fall did you have?
It's whatever.
Yeah.
It's standard.
Yeah.
Standard fall. So over the fall will be that much. It'll be the standard fairings or whatever they're called.
Yeah, that's right. 1
Um,
to 40 is.
yeah.
I think 1 to 80 is the minimum. but you need 1 to 40 because it
It
settles
comes off
a
the
bit.
side, it goes down, and there's instead of it coming down the window, so lots of shortcuts in the past were picked up,
Yes.
and just one gutter. And I was looking, right, I'm going to be here a long time, and so but watching them work, they work hard, but the right trades know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a joy to behold.
And they will listen to you.
Yeah.
I think the modern ones don't. I think some of the Europeans, but I was told off once that they're not interested in.
No.
It's speed.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the communication problem, because if it's bad enough with the homegrown guys, when you've got language problems.
The homegrown guys don't like Poles, don't like the East Europeans.
Well,
It's not a Brexit thing, or
no, it's to do with being undercut on price, isn't it?
it's undercut, and they don't know. They just do it one way,
Yeah.
and then if you get a mix of cultures, shall we say,
Yeah.
because the guy that did the work, I think he came from Africa or Jamaica or something like that.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing
Yeah.
and enjoyed doing it because he could design it as he was going along, and
Yeah.
he did miss a bit splits just on the windows, which I've had to retrofit. But
Yeah. There's always something like that, isn't there?
and well, it was coming in, and it was, and I've had to. The only way I could do was to make them, because it's 2 floors out, was to make them and set them in putty, even though it's up against a double glazed window.
Yeah.
He was on. Another building site they're on. They have some poles, and they didn't quite. They just had a very different view of Winston,
Yeah.
just because down to colour.
Oh, yeah, really, I think there's...
And it was really, and
that's a bit
he was
sad,
chilled
isn't
out
it?
about it, but
Yeah.
the East Europeans have got a bit of a problem with
Well,
it.
I think that is,
Some of them.
that can be the case, but no,
Some
it's-
told Albanians are full.
I think things like dry lining is things that are sort of a bit easier to explain. Maybe decorating.
Yeah.
Something.
But then if you're dry lining walls in a bathroom, it's okay. You're dry lining it, but you might leave your gap, but it's got to have a gap presumably at the top and the bottom to get the airflow. But if you seal both,
Oh, for a period.
Yes.
Probably, yeah.
and to my mind, I think wet rooms are going to be the next problem, because people will put in them. If I
Yeah.
could have wanted a wet room,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it on. I'd put it up 6 inches
I know.
because
I know. It's like shower trays, isn't it?
yeah, same. It's how you're going to have a problem. How are you going to get to it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if it's a solid floor downstairs, then maybe that's not so worrying, but anywhere else, say on an old property, it's, I mean, they can look great.
How do you? It's
But I
bunged
think-
up. How you get to replace it?
I know, I mean, it's like 2 things in every survey is shower trays and flat roofs, isn't it, that you
Yeah.
flag up, so. No, I do find it with builders, sometimes it's easier to do it yourself, rather than get them back, oh God, it's like having kids, by the time you've explained it,
Yeah.
how to do it, I'll just try to do it myself.
Yes, but wet rooms, I think, they look great. And people want level access, but then long-term maintenance. How are you going to get into it?
Well, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Because
You've
it's
got
all
to take
tiled.
Mm.
There's no access whatsoever. You damage it by lifting floorboards. But
Yeah.
I mean, so you're going to have damp coming through.
But if you've got these nice, expensive 2-foot tiles
Yeah.
that they don't make anymore.
Well, I don't know. Perhaps we're killjoys, do you think? Surveying profession.
Well,
I don't know. It's our job is to point out how pretty a house is. You'd be worried if you try to be right.
encima ya está, ¿no? Porque esto también me va...
No, no, claro. Solamente pásale este y ya. Aunque voy a decir con la amiguita, bueno, no sé cómo se quede. Miren, por ejemplo, cuando usted da café, sí o sí pasa, pero cuando no ve, solamente así nomás le pasa.
Sí, polvo ya está, ¿no?
Sí, sí, me entiendes. O sea, para que se vaya pasando, porque así no y si usted tiene algún objetivo perdido, yo qué sé, se lo lleva a la seguridad.
A la seguridad.
Bueno, porque hay alguna gente que viene y me pregunta por qué.
No te preocupes.
Bueno, y esta cosita no se olvide ya. Entonces ya le he mostrado esto, vamos a un poquito allá y perfecto. Bueno, todo cierra esta a las 8.
Salgo por ahí y ya encuentro los otros, ¿no?